Welcome to our webinar on differentiate and win, engaging prospects and closing more sales. As we are waiting for folks to join our session, please feel free to let us know where you are joining us from in the chat. We want to hear from you throughout our time together today. We'd love to see where folks are joining us from. Let us know your name and location. And as we, again, wait for folks to join, just a quick housekeeping note that this webinar will be recorded and it will be made available to all of our registrants after the session. Welcome, welcome. We've got folks joining us from San Diego.
All right.
Yeah, Kentucky, Mexico, Orange County, California, Colorado. Absolutely wonderful. Welcome to everyone. Excited to see all these folks joining. So we'll go ahead and kick off. Again, welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about how to differentiate and win, engaging prospects and closing more sales. I am Michelle Richardson. I am the Vice President of our Sales Performance Research Center here at the Brooks Group. And I am excited to have Dan Markin join us, our Vice President of Sales Strategy and Consulting. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Michelle. It's great to be here. It's always a pleasure.
And I can tell you all out there, having Dan join us, it is going to be an exciting session. It's going to be entertaining and it's going to be informational. So we are thrilled to have you join us.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we are going to be talking about differentiating in the sales process. And so as we go through today, we're going to be sharing some strategies with you in particular, how to use better questioning to build rapport, uncover wants and needs, being able to manage objections, navigate those challenging conversations, to be able to collaborate with customers to achieve those beneficial outcomes, and really creating those long-term relationships and delivering ongoing value to customers. Differentiation is a common challenge that we hear from organizations, so important in the sales process, and especially if you're selling or your teams are selling a more commoditized offering, right? And really the seller themselves, I think, can be an important differentiator. Again, let us know where you're joining us from, and throughout the process or throughout our time together today, please send us your questions and comments. I'd love to see you engage with us in the chat. You can also give us questions or send us questions through the Q&A. Right, so as we talk about differentiating to win, let's think about why differentiation helps sellers win more often, right? We all know sellers can't be all things to all customers, even though sometimes we try. And differentiation helps salespeople prospect better by knowing if what you sell will bring the prospect value or not. And I think essentially this comes down to better qualification, right? So you have a better chance of differentiating yourself, or your teams have a better chance of differentiating themselves if they are in front of, and when they are in front of, qualified opportunities, right? Those who have a need and are aware of that need for your offering, those who have the budget, right, for what it is that you sell, that sense of urgency, and I think trust. That there's an ability to build trust between you and the customer. That is where true differentiation can really start. Dan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Michelle. As a career salesperson my whole life, one of the things that I mistakenly always focused on, and I hear many sellers and sales leaders talk about, how do we become better sellers? How do we sell more? How do we sell more frequently? And I think in terms of differentiation, we forfeit the true differentiator in our interactions with prospects and customers. And what I mean by that is the only thing that will really ever be the true difference in a sales interaction is always and will always be the seller. And so I say that because if you're to be honest, how different is your conversation that you're having with a prospect and your features and benefits? How different is that conversation than the guy or gal that came in before you from the competitor or the guy or gal that came in after you from the competitor. And what I find is that often we're all kind of talking about the same things. If you tout safety, for example, as a feature and benefit of one of your products, the competition isn't going to say that their products or services aren't safe, for example. And so what I would encourage people to do, the first step in differentiation, as Michelle said, is qualification, but don't try to be different. I'm sorry, don't try to be better, try to be different. Try to be memorable, because anything that is eventually better is at first at least different. So if you focus on being different, creating different interactions, different constructs in the way you're communicating with the prospect or customer, that increases the probability that you will be different. And that's what I think is the most important thing to focus on in sales interactions.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we think about really understanding and knowing if what you sell will bring the prospect value or not, that really comes from asking better questions. Again, having more quality interactions with the customer, which kind of goes right back to what you were saying, right?
Yeah.
It is all about the salesperson and how they show up, and they are the true differentiator.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So 3 ways to be a successful seller. So how we differentiate. I know, Dan, this is a concept that is very near and dear to your heart. So walk us through this.
Yeah. So, I think it's important to recognize Michelle and her team through the Sales Performance Research Center in Greensboro do a lot of outstanding research. And some of the things that we've seen is that what most sellers tend to do in a sales process is they work to get a meeting with a prospect or customer, and then they work very quickly to apply them a solution. And then from there, they try to convince the prospect or customer of all the reasons they should buy it. Now, as a seller myself, I know all the reasons for that. There's urgency. We have numbers to make. There's goal attainment. We're worried if we don't do it, the competition will kind of take that away from us. And that all may be true. But again, as you think about what we said a few minutes ago about being different, I find that there is a sequence, if you will, to increasing the probability of successful interactions and successful sales methodology with customers. And again, I'm very steadfast on the word that we have to use probability, because there's no certainties in life, only probabilities. And so what I find is that the first thing we really need to think about is, can we create likability with the prospect or customer? And when you think about being liked, sure, it makes us feel good and people pat us on the head and it gives us kind of some encouraging feelings, but we don't want to be liked just because it does those things. We want to be liked because it increases the probability that we're going to get to advance to the next step or the next part of the sequence, which is the ability to gain trust. And if you don't think that likability is important in the ability to gain trust, let me ask you this question. How many of you have not bought something simply because you didn't like the person trying to sell it to you? So likability is a science, and through the Sales Performance Research Center in Greensboro, we measure and monitor likability from a scientific perspective so we can increase the probability that we're gaining it. So we want to be liked. When we're liked, people will then open up to us. We get the opportunity to gain trust. Trust is essentially 3 things, ladies and gentlemen. It's credibility, telling people the truth, being there when they need you, reliability, and really putting their wants and needs ahead of your own. And if you can do those 3 things, you increase the probability of gaining trust. And when you have trust, you then have the golden key to help them solve their problems. People are going to buy from you for these 3 reasons: because they like you, they trust you, and you can solve your problems. But it's important to be steadfast and methodical in terms of how we traverse this sequence. I think about it like this. Some of you may be in this situation sometimes. Every month I go on a diet and I say, you know what, I'm going to lose 10 pounds this month. Start on the first day of the month. I get up, I drink water, I eat salad, and I exercise. Second day of the month, I get up, I drink water, I eat salad, and I exercise. Third day of the month, I get up, drink water, eat salad, and exercise. By the 4th day of the month, I'm feeling pretty good, and I weigh myself. I've gained 0.2 of a pound. By the 4th day of the month, I eat 6 cheeseburgers and 4 milkshakes or whatever it is. The point is that before I can lose 10 pounds, I have to lose 1. But yet as sellers, we get so fixated on the 10 pounds instead of focusing on 1. When I get to 1, I can get to 2. So this is important in terms of the sequence. Focus first on being liked, and then worry about gaining trust, and then worry about solving their problems. Take it 1 pound at a time.
I agree with you, Dan. One thing I would add to that, I think, is continuing to move that forward. I do think that there can be a tendency to really focus in particular on that likability aspect. And get comfortable thinking that we have really good relationships, my customers like me, therefore I'm going to get the business. And so I think, in working with clients and with organizations, making sure that you continue to build and work towards gaining that trust, then work towards solving those problems. It is a process, and don't just settle for step number one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as we think about how we progress from being likable to gaining trust to solving problems, let's think about the types of salespeople and how they show up in front of customers. If you have been in one of our training programs, you will likely be familiar with this concept as it is about to unfold as we talk about where salespeople place their focus. And Dan, I'm going to turn this over to you to walk us through the types of salespeople and that implication on differentiation.
Absolutely. So there are essentially three types of sellers. You have the bottom 20% of sellers that are focused on their survival and the quota. And this is really about where they focus, where they kind of, from a mental perspective, kind of keep their thoughts. So it's about my commission, my return, my number, my territory, all the things that they have to do. Then we move into kind of the 60% of sellers. And this is where most of us, these are good, strong, proven track record sellers. And they're typically focused on three things: their product or their service. They want to believe in what they're selling. They want to make some money. They're concerned about their income. And they have some bravado. They're confident. They have some ego. And that's good. We want confidence. And again, this is kind of where most of us will fall. But the top 20% of sellers are focused on something entirely different. They're focused on the true customer wants and customer needs. And as you look at the focus curve in terms of where the bottom 20% focus versus where the top 20% focus, you can see that there's an antithetical difference versus what we're thinking about in terms of ourselves versus the customers. And, the best way I can describe this is, if you've ever sold anything, you know that if you're honest about the situation, not that we don't want to make as much money as we can and do the best for the organization that we can, but we sell differently depending on where we are against our goals, organizational goals, compensation goals. And what we tend to do is have a little bit more confidence when we're not against that goal. And so what happens is, folks that are always kind of worried about survival and quota, they are inflicting urgency on themselves. And it's important to recognize, in any interaction, personal or professional, whoever is experiencing more urgency is always at a disadvantage. The other thing to think about in terms of the focus curve, I know I was guilty of this. I was selling for an organization one time, and maybe this will resonate with you. I would show up to see a prospect and I'd say, hey, how's business? How are things going? And, maybe the prospect might say something like this: well, it's not going so well. And I'd say, well, really, what's up? And they'd say, well, I'll tell you what, I'm just not having a good time. My spouse won't talk to me. My car won't start. My daughter ran away and my dog died. And I say, oh, wow, that's terrible. So let's talk about whatever I'm here to sell you. And the customer would just kind of go along with it. Now, I'm not suggesting that we be armchair psychologists, but what we do is we focus on what we want to do, our products, our services. And in a real application, it might look like this. When you go and meet with a prospect, you say, hey, how are things going? And they say, it's not going so well. And I said, really, what's going on? And they say, well, I'm having a hard time with staffing. I can't keep staffed. And instead of then trying to sell them something that I can help them with their staffing, like every other seller, not creating any differential, I'd say, well, tell me about what impact that's having on your business, and tell me about what you're doing to combat it. And we'd have a very robust relationship about whatever this prospect or customer's pain points were. And then I would go away. I'd go to Starbucks or Panera Bread. And when I used to usually send price sheets or quotes or whatever it was I would send, I didn't do that anymore. What I would do is I would really research and spend time talking about the things or learning about the things we talked about. And I'd put some information together and I'd send it over to the prospect. And I'd say, hey, sorry to hear you're having a hard time with staffing. Here's some information I found in your local geography within the demographic that might help you. Now, if you think because I did that, they turned around and, emailed me back and said, Dan, you're great, let me buy something from you, that's not the case. They didn't even respond to the email. But what would happen is the next week, when I would call to follow up with them, instead of calling and following up and saying, did you get my price list or my quote, survival and quota, my quote, my price list, I would say, hey, tell me about staffing. Has it gotten any better? Well, no, it hasn't really gotten any better. I'd say, well, hey, I sent some stuff over to you last week. I don't know if it helps or not. Prospect might say, yeah, I got it. Thanks for sending that. And then we go on to a whole other conversation about their business. Well, over time, as I continued to really take a vested interest in them and their business over a period of weeks, I would forget that I was even trying to sell them something because I was more interested in their wants and needs. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, one day, a prospect, as I called this person to see how things were going, said, hey, Dan, while I got you on the phone, what can you tell me about X? And X happened to be something that I sell, and the prospect knew it. The point was, I started to get the things that I wanted that were important to me, if I'm being honest, with commissions and payments and those kind of things, but it was the way in which I did it. I differentiated my interactions with the prospects and customers because I was focused on them, not me. And that sounds cliche, but if you can work to do that, doing the things we talked about, be liked, be credible, be reliable, put others' wants and needs in front of your own, you'll work to drive towards customers' needs and wants. Your focus will be enhanced and your results will follow.
I think that is just kind of really summarizes this whole kind of graphic and this concept in a nutshell in terms of really being able to focus on those customer needs and wants. And you talked about, providing additional information that was more related to the customer's issue rather than your product or service. And then asking good questions and kind of building that relationship, really building
Right.
trust. Yeah. And I'm curious for the folks that are listening and participating with us today, as you think about either your teams, if you're a manager, or if you are a seller, kind of think about where you might fall or where your team falls on this focus curve. Are they more focused on survival quota versus their product, or we have the best product ever, the best solution? I want to be the number one salesperson. Or are they really thinking about where the customer's needs and wants are? Because again, as Dan said, you're showing up looking like everybody else when you're, in that kind of 80% there. The other thing that I want to point out as well is that the focus curve, your place on the focus curve, or your team's place on the focus curve, can change and can shift just based on life and what's happening, right? Dan alluded to kind of hitting up against the end of the month and maybe trying to hit your quota, right? And you may find yourself as a salesperson or as a manager may find your team really kind of stuck in that bottom 20%. I've got to hit my number. I've got to hit my number. I got to hit my number. And that really does influence how you show up in front of customers. Or maybe something else is happening, or in your life, and that can shift you from place to place. And so for managers, from a coaching perspective, I would encourage you, as you are coaching your teams, to think about this concept and really think about and ask, where are you in terms of where's your focus? Are you focusing on your own survival, your own quota? Or are you really focusing on maximizing your income, which is not a bad thing, but are you focusing on what the customer needs and wants?
It's a great point, Michelle. And, I had the opportunity to work with a client of ours some time ago, and they looked at their business in pretty kind of quarter tight specific. So they would kind of reconcile everything at the end of each quarter. Well, to Michelle's point, what would happen would be the sellers and kind of the flavor of the organization would be to be more consultative and, in the earlier parts of the quarter. And then what would happen would be they wouldn't get the goal attainment that they would want. So what they would do is they would start to slash their prices and get more aggressive because they were urgent at the end of the quarter. Now, what's really important to understand about this is, and I talked about urgency earlier, another common thing to understand in life, not just in selling, is that we train people how to treat us. And so what started to happen was these organizations would look for quotes, or they talk to the salespeople, and they were trained that if I was asking you early in the quarter, the price was going to be drastically different at the end of the quarter. And so what would happen, the prospects would say, because they were trained that way, well, I could use it, but I'll just wait 2 months and I'll come back because I know you're going to lower the price by 10%. So this idea of really focusing on the customer is extremely important in all phases of a sales cycle, because we train them. And if we train them that we're going to be desperate at a certain time and it's going to be about our survival and quota, we can't be frustrated when they're kind of hitting us over the head about price or delivery or terms, because we've acquiesced and we've given in. So this is incredibly important, not just from a sheer seller perspective, but from an organizational, philosophical perspective as well.
Yeah, I am so glad you mentioned that kind of that example of training customers to buy or to wait for the discount. And it occurs to me that we're in those situations, we are differentiating. We're just differentiating in a negative way. So the big overarching concept there that just kind of that has occurred to me is you can differentiate yourself in a positive way, right, in a way that brings value to the customer. And you can also differentiate yourself as a seller. Your team can differentiate themselves in a negative way.
That's right. That's right. And another point to that is, I know I have been guilty of this my entire sales career, and I don't know how this may resonate with anyone. I have a meeting, let's say, at 2:30 in the afternoon with a prospect. And I show up and I'm bright-eyed and I'm fresh-faced and I'm there at 2:15. 2:30 rolls around, no prospect. 2:40 rolls around, no prospect. I may sit there till 3 o'clock. And then what happens is the prospect may come out and they say, I'm sorry that I'm late. I've had an incredibly busy day. And you know what I would do is I would hop up and I would say, that's okay. And so to Michelle's point, I am training them how to treat me. And they would say, I got 5 minutes for you. And what I used to do is I used to start to just throw up everything I could in 5 minutes to try to get some sort of connection. Now, if you're like me and you've ever been in that situation, you have to ask yourself, if you've been there, how successful were you ever in that scenario of ever being able to sell somebody something? You're not. And you know what? That's because it's all about us. I got my 5 minutes, my survival, my quota. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you know this, but I need to say it. Sometimes we're not the most important thing that person has to do in that day. And so if we really want to create differential, what I would suggest is you wait. And when they come out, you say, hey, look, I get it. You got a business to run. This might not be a good time. Let's schedule some time when it might work. I mean, look, let's be clear about it, candid about it. How happy are all of us when we have a Zoom meeting and it gets canceled, or a Teams meeting and it gets canceled? We get that time back in our day. Provide your prospects with that same grace, because the probability of you in that situation selling them anything is very, very low. And you know that. But yet we continue to do it anyhow because we're focused on survival and quota. Set some time up that's good for them. Not that you're going to win, not that you're going to sell by doing that, but I'll tell you what, you're increasing the probability that you will. So again, there's a lot here that we could talk about the focus curve and where we focus, but extremely important in creating differentiation and differential in the interactions that we're having.
Yes, and you got a comment in the chat spot on that. So
I've been there at 500.
Yeah, and again, one more point. I promise we're going to move on, but it occurs to me as well. Like we think about, as trainers and advocates for a consultative sales process, that those milestones within the process then also contribute to how you show up and differentiate. And in those examples where you show up and the client is late or doesn't show up, simple things like sending an agenda to confirm your appointment, things that we teach as part of that process are little things that maybe prevent that situation from happening, but also create a different perception of the customer, from the very beginning.
So one last thing to Michelle's point, but she brought up something I think it's really important. You talk about the psychology of how people are trained to treat us. Michelle talks about sending an agenda and letting them know that you're going to come, what you're going to talk about, confirming the appointment possibly. Think about it this way. People that believe that their time is of value, think about the people that you personally rely on for consultative insight. Could be a physician, could be an attorney, could be a financial planner. You know what? I bet when they call to confirm your appointment, we're not late when we go to the doctor, are we? We're not, because they've trained us that their time is of value. They confirm the appointment. And if we're not going to make it, and you know what, if we walk in 30 minutes late and say, hey, look, I'm sorry, I've had a heck of a day, I couldn't get here on time, the receptionist, he or she does not just stand up and say, oh, that's okay, and the doctor come out of the exam room and stop what they're doing. No, they say, well, I'm sorry, you missed your appointment. They may charge us and we may have to reschedule it. So again, this idea, the psychology of how people begin to treat us starts with us and how we train them to do so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've talked about, again, differentiation through focusing on customer needs and wants, like how you show up, showing interest in the customer. So let's talk about how you identify what the customer truly needs. And, a confused buyer buys nothing, right? So how do we determine what the customer truly wants, truly needs? Dan, talk to us a little bit about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to understand what an individual or a buyer will tell you that they need has little and often nothing to do with what they're really going to buy. If I was to throw this out at you, age-old question, you're getting ready to buy a new vehicle. What do you need the vehicle to do? I need to get from A to B, A to B. I need A to B. Okay, well, you know what? I have a neighbor of mine. She just taught her son to drive. She needed something so he could get from school to home, A to B. And this is a true story. She found him a high mileage car. It was a good brand. It's been reliable as the day is long. She paid $1,800 for that car. Now, if I can get you an A to B, how many of you are driving around in a vehicle that cost $1,800? Some of you might be laughing and say maybe a month, $1,800 a month. But the point is, I can get you A to B for $1,800. But that's not really what you want. That's what you told me that you needed. But you need different things. You need four-wheel drive or heated seats or air-conditioned seats or whatever it might be. So people buy out of want, not out of what they need. I was with a great client of ours just this week, and we were kind of going through a similar exercise. It's a construction client, heavy equipment construction. And the point that I was drawing, I said, what is it that your prospect needs? And while they're great sellers, they were saying, well, they need all of these things. They need the machines to do this and that. And I said, well, let's dial it back. What do they need? And the resulting kind of conclusion was they need a hole dug in the earth. That's what the prospect needs. Now, there are a myriad of machines through different kind of competitors, and us included, that can do that. But why do they need that hole? And what we do a lot of times is we make assumptions about what we think is important to us. There's a psychological construct out there. We talk about this in likability. We talk about this in kind of feature benefit analysis. We think that people obviously like the same things that we like. They may not, or they think the same things are important that we think are important. They may not. They need a hole. The question becomes is, why do they need the hole? And what's important in them digging that hole? Well, they want to dig the hole so they can finish the job. They want to finish the job so they can move on to the next job. They move on to the next job, they can make more money. And if they make more money, then what are they going to do? Well, they may expand in the business. They may pay for tuition for their son or daughter. They may do something else. The fact of the matter is we don't know. And so you differentiate yourself by not just stopping at what's important to us. Again, it goes back to the focus curve, our survival and quota. But if you take what prospects are telling us that they need and stop right there, that's where the bottom 20% of sellers play, those survival and quota. The top 20% understand, why do they need the whole? Why it is important to them? What are their needs and what are their wants? And so it is important to truly differentiate yourself because, as Michelle said, and I said it a couple of minutes ago, how different is the conversation that they're having with us versus anybody else about what we're selling them? And then when there's no differentiation, they get confused because we're all the same. And then they don't buy, or they stay with what they have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We had a question come in, and so I want to address that really quickly from Kyle. And he said, just curious if the research shows that prospects think of differentiation more from a relationship or service perspective versus a product or offering perspective. And so my answer to that is it depends on the customer and what their definition of value is. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more just coming up next. I will say that we worked with a client a few years ago, and in working with them, what they really wanted to understand was what their value proposition was. What did clients really think of them, and why did they buy? And so we surveyed some of their top clients, the ones that they considered ideal that they wanted to replicate. And we asked these clients what was most important and then what was most unique about this, about working with this organization. And the sellers in this organization would tell us, and we said, what differentiates you? And they would say our quality, our service, our relationships, right? Quality, the big three trifecta of differentiators. But what we also wanted to do was actually try to narrow down what was meant by quality, service, relationship. And so what customers said was most important, they're an industrial organization, was order accuracy, on-time performance, and accessibility and product availability, right? So as we think about kind of the quality and availability of the actual solution, they said that was most important. What they said was most unique about this particular organization was the responsiveness of their sales team, the availability of the type of solution that they wanted, and the accessibility of their sales team. So as we think about service, how they kind of quantified service or described service was responsiveness and accessibility. And then the ability, obviously, to have the product that the customer needed when and where they needed it. They also noted things like technical expertise and support. So again, I think it varies based on the customer. I think what I would advise for any organization that's out there joining us today is to understand how your customer defines terms like quality and service and relationships, because those are all, we think of them as more objective terms, maybe, especially things like quality and service, but they really are subjective, and it is what the customer defines them to be. And the way you can do that is, again, asking better questions, asking deeper questions, going beyond just kind of hearing an opportunity for your solution and not kind of going deeper to understand the why. So again, as we're talking about making the value connection, and Dan's been talking about asking better questions, and really understanding the why behind what the customer needs, not just what they need, but why they need it. Then we need to make that value connection. We need to connect that solution back to value to the customer. And if you've been in any of our training programs, you are likely familiar with our value formula. But again, this is a way to differentiate in front of the customer to show that you truly understand what it is that they're looking to achieve, why they want it, and you are building enough value to offset that perception of price. Okay, and so the value formula simply means value is the perceived benefits that your customer is going to receive from your solution. And these are the perceived benefits that they told you were most important, divided by or over the perceived price or the perceived emotional cost. And those perceived emotional costs can be just as important, if not more important, than the price itself. And those emotional costs can be things like the risk of change, or an existing relationship that they may have with another vendor. Anything that will make them hesitant to make a change, right? It's the pain associated with the purchase.
So, this equation has been extremely helpful to me. And when you think about it, it looks like there's a lot going on there. But I think, and Michelle alluded to this earlier, when you think about the perceived benefits, Michelle started us off talking about alignment. And alignment within the benefits have to be congruent with what your value differentiator is. Example, I spent 43 weeks on the road last year, and I remember going into a Walgreens before I left to buy some toothpaste. And I walked in and I was in a hurry, but I saw there was a $20 tube of toothpaste. And I looked at that and I was like offended. I was like, who pays $20 for a tube of toothpaste? Like, I'll take Colgate or Crest or whatever. The point in all of that was someone does buy it. It's just not me. So the benefits of that toothpaste are probably really never going to be congruent to my personal or intrinsic value construct. So the benefits themselves, there has to be congruency between your benefits and the customer's kind of value construct. Example, Honda and Mercedes do not compete for the same customer. Both great brands in their own right, but very differently. Nordstrom, Walmart, great brands, but the construct is very different. So often what we do is we're not congruent in understanding, is their value construct in alignment with the benefits that we can provide? And to Michelle's point, when you think about emotional cost, this is why people buy. Value often is a hard thing for all of us as sellers to articulate. I could ask 50 sellers what value is, and I would probably get 50 different answers. The way that I kind of describe value is like this, and I ask people this question. How many of you on the call right now pay more for something you could pay less for in your personal life? All of us do it. Now, if you were to ask yourself, why do you do it? It's typically for those emotional costs, reliability, ease of use, consistency, accuracy, peace of mind. It's those things that cause us to generally pay more. So when you think about the benefits, are the benefits congruent with what we can offer in the client's value construct? Is the emotional cost, the value that those things provide, eliminating or eradicating those emotional triggers? And the perception of price is very important, as Michelle said, because it's counterintuitive. I would be willing to bet that your smallest customers, everybody on the call, your smallest customers or your smallest bids or the smallest accounts that you have in terms of dollars, probably take up the most amount of your time. That's because while a dollar is a dollar, the value or the perception of that dollar is different. $50 to me is very different than $50 to Elon Musk. It's still $50, but how it's viewed. So it's actually kind of counterintuitive. The smaller, in most cases, the client or prospect, the more value you have to create. So again, there's a lot here in terms of dissecting this, but understanding what value is really the trigger in understanding why people will do things or why they won't, and uncovering that value construct.
Yeah, absolutely. One more point that I want to make about kind of the value formula is it should be unique to each customer. And again, if you're a seller and you are presenting your solution to a prospect or to a customer, I encourage you to kind of run through this exercise to just kind of as a gut check. Am I building enough value for what I'm offering? Am I going to be able to differentiate my solution against a competitor? And as a manager, you should be coaching your teams, asking them, all right, let's talk about the perceived benefits. Let's talk about your value proposition here, your value formula. What are the benefits that they're going to receive? Let's talk about the perceived emotional costs and their perception of price. And it may be that if you do not have a value formula where the benefits outweigh the perceived price or emotional cost, you are not ready to present that solution. And again, I think if you are showing up and you are kind of giving the same presentation, the same value formula, the same value proposition from customer A to B to C to D, et cetera, you are not differentiating yourself because you are not showing that you have a true understanding of the customer's needs and wants. And so again, you run the risk of looking like everyone else that's coming in the door. So we talked about asking good questions and differentiating from the conversation. And we've talked about building value in a way that differentiates a seller. Let's now talk about emotional intelligence and its relationship in the sales process and its importance as a selling skill. Emotional intelligence is the ability to really understand and manage your own emotions as well as the emotions of others. And it is a critical skill that helps sellers understand, really dig deeper and get the why from the customer in order to sell them what they need. It impacts things like empathy, right? That ability to connect with a customer and really understand what it is they are going through, what they need, what they want. It is essential in asking good questions and in listening, really actively listening. Oftentimes, as sellers, we have a tendency to, we're listening, we're asking questions. We might be listening for what we want to say next, as opposed to really listening to understand the customer and find those opportunities to go deeper. And it's also really important in the ability to be able to influence others, manage stressful situations. Think about having those difficult customer conversations, those negotiations, keeping your emotions kind of at under the surface or at bay, and keeping yourself in check. It is something that can be assessed. It is something that can be trained to. I know, Dan, you call it a perishable skill.
Yes, it is. I think, I'm a big fan of the field of emotional intelligence. And I've learned a lot from Michelle and the research that her and her team has done. And one of the questions that I get asked often is, what is something quick in real time or advice you could give me in real time that might start to increase my ability to be more emotionally intelligent from a selling perspective? And this is what I may offer you. You have to ask yourself this question when you're engaging prospects, and be honest about this question. Are you asking prospects or customers questions with the intent to respond? Or are you asking them questions with the intent to truly understand? Most of us are asking questions with the intent to respond. But emotionally intelligent people resist that impulse. And again, this, you can see how this is all kind of links together. If you're focused on kind of the wants and needs of the customer, and you go in and you're asking questions to truly understand, it's important to recognize this. Great sellers are like great therapists. I don't know if anybody's ever been to therapy or not. Therapy is a great thing. There's my commercial for it. But a great therapist will never give you the answers to your problems. A great therapist will ask you questions that bring you around to the realization of what your issue or problem is and what you need to do about it. Great sellers are the same way. A great seller will never sell you anything. They're very emotionally intelligent. They seek to understand. And when they understand, they can ask questions to bring that customer or prospect around to have what their solution may be, may help solve their problem. So again, start by asking questions with the intent to truly understand and resisting the impulse to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, emotional intelligence is kind of one of those aspects that really kind of it almost it's like the nuance of selling. I think you can execute on the mechanics of asking questions and presenting your solution, but really being able to read the customer well, identify with them, listen, really be able to build those relationships. I think is this is kind of that extra wrapping around that just makes sellers more effective. And again, it is coachable. It is something that can be developed, and critical in those situations where sellers are having to deliver bad news or having to have difficult conversations. Really being able to channel their own self-regulation, being able to read the customer, incredibly important.
Yeah.
I also want to just remind our audience, please feel free to add comments in the chat or send us questions. You can put those in the chat or through the Q&A. Would love to hear what you are thinking about in terms of differentiation and questions that you may have. We'd be happy to answer those as we go. Still on the topic of emotional intelligence, let's think about ways that emotional intelligence can improve seller effectiveness, right? And again, we've kind of alluded to this. They can control their own emotions and how they show up with customers. You think about, again, going back to that focus curve, when you are or your team is in that survival and quota kind of mindset or mode, they may show up and reflect that heightened sense of urgency, that instinct to discount, that instinct to be focused more on themselves rather than on really understanding the customer. We've also talked about managing those stressful situations, being able to control your emotions in a negotiation, being able to really understand and control their thoughts, their words. It even can impact how a seller maybe shows up in front of the customer, but also how they interact with their internal colleagues as well. And improving the ability to influence customers. That the social regulation aspect of emotional intelligence is really deals with how well someone can read their customer, how well they can then have influence and again build that rapport and that trust to be able to effectively influence and negotiate. Reading prospects and customers more effectively, picking up on how someone else is feeling. And Dan, this kind of goes back to the example that you were talking about earlier, where you're talking on the phone with a customer and they're telling you all the bad things that are happening in their life, and you're like, okay, let's talk about can I send you my pricing sheet?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And even as well, when that prospect then shows up late and you've been waiting for them, and you're looking to get that 5 minutes and try to talk about everything that you came originally to discuss. So again, being able to read the room, so to speak, and pick up on those signals from the customer. And as well, being able to handle those difficult conversations. We've done a lot of work with customers, particularly a couple of years ago. Supply chain issues were rampant, and we had a lot of client organizations who didn't have product to deliver to customers. Salespeople were having to go in and manage expectations and deal with unhappy customers. And the emotional intelligence aspect of it was extremely important. Really, again, recognizing your own emotions, but being able to have those conversations, very directly.
And this shows up in a myriad of ways. And a real life example, real time example might be you present a proposal to a customer, and the customer prospect may say, "Oh, that's a lot of money. That's way more than I thought." And what our first blush reaction might be, because we want to connect with the customer, we want to show empathy, we might say something like this: "And I know it's a lot of money." Well, if you can regulate your own emotions, you may decrease the probability of doing that, because once you say to the prospect or customer, "Yeah, it's a lot of money," you've just agreed with them. It's going to be very hard then to negotiate from a position of strength your pricing if you are agreeing with them. So emotionally intelligent people have this ability, as Michelle said, to really self-regulate their emotions and not somehow get ourselves in situations that aren't so easily to get out of sometimes. And another example, you're dealing with a prospect and you're providing them a solution, and they say, "Well, this isn't what I thought it was. This isn't what I thought it was going to be at all. I expected something very different." Well, obviously, the answer to that question is, well, what did you expect? Compared to what? Why do you make that comparison? So again, the ability to regulate emotions, stay in control, helps us to kind of stay in control, not only of ourselves, but the interactions of others that we're having. Again, when we're in control and we're regulated, we tend to have better outcomes. And you combine that with the art of empathy and science of empathy, again, increasing probability of successful interactions.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And Chris, from our audience, is saying slow down to speed up is the motto of their business development team when walking prospects through the meet and probe phase. So yes, exactly. Slow down to speed up. Really take time to understand the customer in that. You referenced the meet and probe phase, which is building rapport, really, again, gaining the trust of the customer and then asking those deeper questions. And again, that is how sellers can differentiate themselves. It is how they show up in front of the customer.
That's right.
So let's tackle some myths about selling, right? So you have to be relentless. Dan, do you have to be relentless?
Look, I think this is something that we all learn as sellers, that you've got to be relentless. You got to keep knocking on doors. You got to keep calling on people. Well, keep in mind, relentless becomes annoying, and then you have no differentiation because everybody is relentless and everybody is annoying. I'm a big football fan, and if you ever watch a football game and a team's running a play and it's not working, they don't continue to run the same play. You have to run a different play. So while you don't have to be relentless, you do have to be relentlessly resilient. If you're trying something and it doesn't work, try to do it another way and try until you get the achieved outcome that you're hoping for. That's the old cliche, the definition of insanity is doing something, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But we do that as sellers. We do have to be relentless, but we have to be relentlessly resilient. Don't keep running the same play if it's not working, because we're creating no differentiation in doing that.
Yeah. I was working with an organization a few years back, and I remember one of their sales managers was telling their team, like, activity. That's what we want. We want activity. And activity is good. My thought on that as I was listening, and where we wanted to coach the team, was you need to focus on the right activity. And this is like what we talked about, earlier in our session, is understand where you can differentiate. Who is your target customer? Where are they? Who should you be in front of that's going to have the most appreciation for your value, that is going to be able to fit within your budget? and is going to, again, need what it is that you have to sell. And so really, again, shifting that mindset from just relentless activity, I think, to more focused activity.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, resiliency, another thing that can be measured through emotional intelligence, that ability to be able to bounce back, when you have a setback. And number two, it is impossible to get a prospect's attention. I mean, I know it is hard. Prospecting is hard, right, Dan? It is
Yes.
difficult. It is
Yeah.
difficult. But is it impossible to get a prospect's attention? How can you differentiate in this way?
The first thing is when you think this statement alone, it's impossible to get prospects' attention. It just kind of, again, goes back to the focus curve. Why should they pay attention? What are you offering them that is of value in terms of what they want and they need? Or do you need their attention so you can sell them something? I'll let you say it, Michelle, since it's such a great quote. Our founder, Bill Brooks, used to say something about prospects and when they pay attention to us.
Prospects pay attention to someone they believe has something important to say to them.
That's right. So are the things that we have to say to people important to us so we can get something from them, or is it really important to them? So again, the other part of differentiation, what do we have to say that's important? And when I used to run a sales team, I would get this kind of statement all the time. And my response to it was, they would say, X and X prospect won't see me. I said, well, why should they? Why should they? And if you challenge yourself to really come up with the solution or answer to that question, you increase the possibility that you're going to get their attention if you move to their wants and needs.
All right. Myth number 3, selling is only about relationships. We talked about this a little bit earlier, and the quiet business we sell on, our value is our relationships. And I think relationships are important, but it's certainly not the only thing.
No, look, I mean, relationships, people we sell all the time. And I was brought up in a way, selling is all about relationships. It's relationships. Okay, well, you have to ask yourself, what is a relationship then? Or really rather, what is a good relationship? And a good relationship, personally and professionally, kind of comes down to some very simple things. It's your ability to give another person what they want and what they need when they want it and when they need it. Because when we fail to do that, we essentially let another individual down. And maybe we do that, 8 times, 9 times out of 10, and we're human. We may make mistakes. They'll give us another bite of the apple. They'll give us another shot. But if you think about personal and professional relationships, if someone or we do that over time consistently, we're not able to give them what they want when they want it, the relationship dissolves. It erodes. So relationships are important, but it's even more important to give an individual what they want, what they need, when they want it, and when they need it. Call it whatever you'd like, but that's what we focus on in terms of driving kind of a partnership, maybe not a relationship, but a partnership forward.
Yeah. I also think it's, again, thinking back to what we talked about earlier, in terms of being likable, gaining trust, solving problems. Yeah. And I think if you are focusing only on the relationship aspect, then you are stuck right there at being likable. And we have to be able to move forward to gaining trust and then really understanding the customer and being able to solve their problems.
That's right.
Yes. All right. 4th myth. There may be some folks out there are questioning whether this is actually a myth, but it's that all buyers care about is price. And I know price is important, and there are some buyers out there that do buy on price and only care about price, but it's not the only thing.
Again, I go back to how many of you pay more for something that you could pay less for? So clearly the price is not the only thing that you care about in those decisions. So I know as a seller, I don't want to say convenient because it is true sometimes. We will lose on price. I've said it myself a million times, but probably if I'm honest, the amount of times I've said it probably far outweighs the number of times I've actually done it. Typically, if I'm honest about it, I probably didn't have a good construct between what my value offering was and the intrinsic value kind of construct of the customer. Maybe they weren't qualified, as Michelle said. I went through a process and had a low probability of closing for a variety of reasons. I wasn't talking to the right person, or they didn't trust me for whatever reason. So again, it's not always about price. It's an easy catch-all. Not to Michelle's point, not to discount that some folks don't care about it more than others. Look, I wasn't paying $20 for a tube of toothpaste, but again, when you pay more for something that you could pay less for, it's not all about price. So it's not necessarily true.
And I kind of go back to, we talked about those perception, right? The perception of what quality is, what a good relationship is, what service is. Price is a perception as well. And the customer needs to believe that what they are paying, they're going to receive great value for the price that they're paying. And again, that is still going back to focusing on what the customer wants and needs and being able to communicate that in a way that then offsets that perception of price. So I kind of want to just summarize kind of these myths, because I feel like there's some overarching themes to what we have talked about today. You have to be relentless. The myth is, we talked about, again, being very focused, very targeted, understanding where you can differentiate, understanding what prospects and customers are going to have the most need or appreciation for the value that you sell. It's impossible to get a prospect's attention. Well, we can get a prospect's attention when they believe that we have something important to say. And when you focus on customer wants and needs, then you are more likely to be thinking about what it is they want and need and what will be of value to them and important to them. Selling is only about relationships, right? And we talked about being likable, and moving past that to building trust, solving problems. That is really more of a long-term relationship, a quality relationship. And then buyers only caring about price. Again, we talked about kind of that perception of value and differentiating yourself through your understanding of the customer and being able to connect what it is they want and need to the value of what you sell. All right, let's talk about our 3 takeaways from our session today. So summarizing beyond even my summary from that last slide there, we want to focus on customer value and solving their problems, right? Asking good questions, connecting the dots, making sure that you are focusing on kind of qualified customers. Sellers who differentiate are more likely to win the deal, and they build a long-lasting client relationship. Right? So we're just getting past being liked to developing that long-term relationship and developing emotional intelligence skills. So important, really kind of that nuance of selling, the mechanics of selling, and really being able to listen more effectively, ask better questions, connect and build trust, manage your emotions, and being able to effectively have those difficult conversations, calmly manage objections as well. And so now I, again, would love your perspective on these, Dan, and also want to remind our audience, please let us know if you have any questions. We'd love to hear from you as we wrap up today.
Yeah, I would just kind of, reiterate what you said, Michelle, but again, kind of leaving today some actionable things in addition to what we're doing. Worry about being different. Don't worry about being better. Create a different interaction with the people that you're engaging with so you can be memorable. And once we're memorable, we have the opportunity to be better. So, and ask questions with the intent to understand, not necessarily respond, if you want to drive emotional intelligence in the right direction.
And again, I would encourage managers, sellers, anyone in our audience today, kind of that gut check of, are you differentiating? Is, where are you on the focus curve? Are you focusing on what the customer wants and needs, or are you focusing more on what you need or what your team needs? And with that kind of as your guidance, I think you're always kind of going to be moving in the right direction. All right. Well, I do not see any questions coming through. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Dan. It is always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. I appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
And want to thank again everyone for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Michelle.